India's marathon elections are at about their halfway mark. 4 phases of a 7-phase election are over. So today, we're asking 3 questions. Where does the election stand after 4 phases? How is the Modi factor affecting the campaign tone? And what does India's election mean for the rest of the world? I'm Paresh Banerjee. Welcome to the program and hello to the DW News community watching this on YouTube. We are looking forward to receiving your questions and comments in the chat next to the streaming window. Now, election season is on in India and the fate of incumbent Prime Minister Narendra Modi is being determined voting phase by voting phase. Despite the searing heat, Indians have been queuing up at polling stations to cast their ballot. It's been about 3 weeks into this exercise, with 3 more to go. Nearly 970 million people are eligible to vote, and just for comparison's sake, that number is more than the electorates of Indonesia, the United States, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and some other countries combined. Now, such numbers mean that the future of the world's most populous nation impacts the world, whether it's through India's influential diaspora at around 18 million strong, or through India's foreign trade policies, or through India's foreign policy and how it deals with global issues of the day. It's an election with wide ramifications and one that our Delhi Bureau has been covering. Here's correspondent Shalu Yadav on what the election is looking like 4 phases in.
The voter turnout has been lower than expected this time. The Election Commission of India expressed concern over the decline and termed it significant but not alarming. Various reasons are being given for this decline. Hot weather, for one, as parts of India are reeling under a heat wave. Another reason cited by experts is voters' apathy towards the candidates because of their dissatisfaction with them. And there's also mistrust, as the exercise is not being seen as fair play by many. We've seen raids by federal law enforcement agencies on opposition leaders and imprisonment of 2 chief ministers ahead of the elections. Even as it's on course to win a 3rd term in office, there's been discontent with Prime Minister Modi's ruling BJP party on issues of unemployment amongst youth and inflation as well. But those issues haven't figured in BJP's campaign trail. Instead, the tone has taken a communal turn as Prime Minister Modi referred to India's minority of Muslims as infiltrators and those who produced many children. This is the first time in 10 years in office that Modi has targeted minority community of Muslims in such strong words, and it has evoked strong reactions, not just from the opposition parties, but the civil society. They called it a hate speech against Muslims. Political analysts say that PM resorting to alleged hate speech reflects panic as his party has not received the kind of support that it expected on the ground. They say that he's now trying to divert people's attention from the real issues on the ground. But his party has defended the speech, saying that he's just called a spade, and his remarks resonated with the majority community of Hindus. Just a reminder here that the ruling BJP party has long been promoting Hindu nationalism and calling for an end to the appeasement of Muslims minorities. Many lawmakers of the party have said that India should be a Hindu-first nation with policies that benefit them.
DW correspondent Shalu Yadav there. But just remember, our YouTube chat is also open and we are waiting to hear from you. You can send us your questions and comments and we'll bring them in to the program. But as Shalu was saying there, it's communal issues that the parties are putting front and center in this election campaign. Here's more on how that's happened.
Just 2 days after the first phase of voting ended, Prime Minister Narendra Modi lambasted the biggest opposition party with comments it decried as hate speech.
When the Congress Party were in power, they said Muslims have the first right over the nation's wealth. This means they will collect people's wealth and distribute it to whom? To those who have more children. To the infiltrators.
The implication, Muslims have too many children, they're coming for Hindus' wealth, and they're not real Indian citizens. It was a remarkable turnaround from just the week before, when Modi's BJP released its manifesto, focused on Modi's guarantee of a developed India. So what happened? Speaking to DW's News Desk programme, political analyst Ashutosh offered this explanation.
The statement signifies that the Prime Minister Narendra Modi is not very confident about after the first phase of polling. And why I'm saying so? Because there is a drop of almost 4 to 5% polling if you compare with 2019. And if the Modi mania or the Modi factor is working, then this polling percentage should have gone up.
Whatever the truth, it seems to have given a disjointed, disparate opposition a second wind.
The
strength of the nation is India's young people. Narendra Modi is losing this election. He is slipping and won't be India's Prime Minister. He has decided that in the next few days, he has to distract your attention. Make some kind of drama. Don't let your attention wander. Unemployment is the biggest issue.
Rahul Gandhi is the main challenger to Narendra Modi. Gandhi's great-grandfather, India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, is so far the only Indian leader to have been elected to a consecutive third term. It's Nehru's record that Modi wants to equal. But as he seeks to make history, India's voters have simple demands.
We experienced numerous problems as a result of Modi's demonetisation. Everyone is quite sceptical of whatever Modi has brought. There should be no distinctions between Muslims and non-Muslims.
This government gave us so much. Previous governments gave us nothing. Today, we are living in the houses built by Modi.
The current government is good, but people need jobs. If people get employed, then they will be happy. People need jobs and businesses so that they can be satisfied.
Just how satisfied they are should become clear on the 4th of June, when the results are declared.
Right, let's get more from Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay. He's a political analyst and author who's written on India's Hindu nationalist politics and is also the author of the book Narendra Modi, The Man, The Times. Welcome, Mr. Mukhopadhyay. Why is the Prime Minister using communal statements in his election campaign?
Very significantly, Mr. Modi started using communal points in his campaign after the first phase of polling on the 19th of April. In fact, 21st of April was the first time when he made such a statement, actually saying that Muslims have more children and calling them infiltrators, both words which have been used in the BJP's campaign for several decades. In fact, even in Mr. Modi's campaign, it has always been a recurring factor right from 2002, the election, which actually began the Modi cult. From that time onwards, whenever Mr. Modi has felt a bit shaky or not very confident in elections, he's always gone to his second nature, which is actually to divide the electorate on the basis of their religious identities.
But does this work for the BJP?
Well, it has in the past. It did in 2019 to a great extent, when hyper-nationalism was equated with a kind of majoritarian politics. It has worked for him in the past also. 2002, most famously in Gujarat. Then again in 2007, when the Congress President Sonia Gandhi, called him, I would say that, Aringli called him, a trader of death, somebody who trades in death. So there have been occasions when it has worked. There have been occasions when it has not worked. As a good Indian, one would always wish that such kind of divisive issues should not work. The ground now suggests that this is not working because religious polarization is not so far at least been seeing, and more than 300 seats constituencies have already voted. So I would say that with a fair amount of elections already over, this card has not worked for Mr. Modi.
So why has it worked in the past and why is it not working now? What is so special about this election?
I think it's a cumulative failure of Mr. Modi on the economic front. In 2014, he did not come here to sort out the Muslims. He came here because he promised jobs. He promised to control prices. He promised to end corruption. Whereas the fact of the matter is that Mr. Modi demonetized all the currency notes, the high denomination currency notes in 2016. But that did not end what we call the parallel currency system in the country. It continues to flourish. And there could be no one better who knows it than the people themselves. Because more often than not, paying bribes is a part of life, even for small things and for very big things.
Right.
Even for elections, there was allegations that the electoral bond scheme, which was actually brought out by the Modi government, was essentially nothing but a way for laundering money and giving money in form of bribes to political parties by totally anonymous sources. Now that process, that the electoral bond system, was declared to be unconstitutional by an authority known in the Supreme Court of India.
Just for context, for people who may not be aware, the electoral bonds system was a scheme that was brought in by the government, which allowed any company, any individual to purchase bonds and dedicate money to political parties without their names being known. Mr. Mukhopadhyay, I'm so sorry. Just stay on the line because we did open this conversation up to our community on YouTube, and there are certain questions and comments that are making their way into the chat. And I'd like to bring up one of them for you to potentially address. And we're just going to be throwing that up on the screen now. It's a question from user Carolina Vilena, who's asking, how is this election affecting democracy in India? It's a very good question. What would you say, Mr. Mukhopadhyay?
Well, in the last 10 years, right from the time Mr. Modi became the Prime Minister of India, India's rating on various democracy functioning indicators has declined very sharply. There have been, it's very easy to make out that certain key institutions have been hollowed out. So the people of India are hoping that this election is going to pave the way for the resurgence of democracy in this country. If Mr. Modi gets an emphatic, mandate for the third term, then definitely it is going to be bad and very worrying news for the future of democracy in India. But in the event of his majority either being controlled or the BJP losing, then it is going to be good or very good news.
On this question of democracy, BJP supporters certainly don't believe that. I mean, the Prime Minister himself calls India the mother of democracy. So therefore, there is no question of democracy being in danger.
Well, being a mother of democracy, of course, is a false narrative which Mr. Modi has spun. India has had a feudal past, and you cannot say that feudalism is in any way a democracy. And also, even if, leave that aside, and accept Mr. Modi's argument that we are the first nation which actually had democratic systems. Point is that what are we going to do with democracy in the past if we do not have it in the present? There have been innumerable instances where one can actually cite as to how democratic practices have been completely hollowed out. Our parliamentary system, which was known for very wide debate and discussion, has been completely destroyed in the sense that there is virtually no debate or discussion within Parliament. All laws are passed with the brute majority which Mr. Modi has brought. And whenever that has not been possible, they have used methods of parliamentary subterfuge.
Right. Mr. Mukhopadhyay, stay on the line because you were talking about the cumulative effect of a failure on the economic front. And one of the issues that a lot of people are talking about is unemployment, particularly youth unemployment. We'd like to play a report by DW correspondent Shalu Yadav here, and then we will continue the conversation off the back of that.
Desperate times force Kuldeep Yadav to take desperate decisions. He's a university graduate with a manufacturing diploma. But after searching for years, the only job he could find was at this flea market in Delhi, where he's now a salesman.
I've been selling clothes here for a year. I'm not happy doing this job. It doesn't match my qualifications, but I have to do it to survive. There are just no jobs available. We expected that this government would give us jobs. We got nothing.
India's educated under 30s are desperate, and very publicly so. LinkedIn is a window into India's unemployment crisis, which is particularly acute amongst the young and the educated. According to a recent report by International Labour Organization, more than 80% of those unemployed in India are youth. In fact, their chances of being jobless are even higher if they're educated, 9 times higher than those who are illiterate. Around 8 million young Indians enter the job market annually, which is already oversaturated. All that many find is disappointment.
The youth unemployment is in the region of 42%. So that's perhaps the highest youth unemployment rates in the world.
Economist Santosh Mehrotra says that India may be the world's fastest growing major economy, but it hasn't been able to take its youth along. One big reason, manufacturing, which creates lots of jobs in other developing economies, still isn't booming in India.
You find that young people have no hesitation about, trying to illegally migrate into the United States. Secondly, they're looking for work in the ex-Soviet Union, in the Russia-Ukraine war. They've even attempted to go to Israel to do construction work on the front lines because Palestinian workers have been thrown off on account of the Gaza war that has been going on. So it's grim, it's very serious.
बड़ा सोचे, think big.
Over the last 10 years in office, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has called India's youth the driving force for growth and promised millions of new jobs. Those promises ring hollow to young Indians like Kuldeep, who've studied hard but feel like they're not a part of India's growth story.
What happened to your promise of offering millions of jobs? The country's future is made of its youth. If the youth itself is in a deep ditch, how will the economy go forward?
Despite the disappointment, he hasn't given up his search for a job he knows he deserves. And he'll vote, he says, for educated leaders to shape India's future.
That report by DW correspondent Shalu Yadav. Mr. Mukhopadhyay, you saw that report. Is youth unemployment Narendra Modi's Achilles heel?
Well, it is, and it is also indicated by the fact that the first-time voters this time have registered in very low proportions. Previously, in 2014, they were much, much higher than what it is now. So quite obviously, it is clear that Mr. Modi has not been able to draw the number of voters who have actually qualified to become voters in the country for the first time. And this is actually, it reflects, the general disillusionment which is setting in with the government. Even at home, we regularly order food, and all the delivery agencies, the delivery boys who come, they're all graduates. Whenever we speak to them, they've gone through education, they have spent thousands of rupees trying to get jobs, but after waiting for 2 years, 3 years, they've not found any jobs. So they are forced to just, for a very measly amount of money, just to survive their days, they actually have taken to delivering food from a restaurant to homes. And, it takes a great risk because they have to beat the clock all the time.
But it's also a fact, isn't it, Mr. Mukhopadhyay, that in 10 years, India has become the 5th largest economy in the world. It was earlier ranked 11. And in recent years, for instance, its GDP has outperformed other major economies, as our viewers can see on this graph right here, from just looking at 2023. Surely Mr. Modi must be doing something, right?
Well, what do you say about a country where 1% of the people own 40% of the national wealth? That's the kind of disparity which is there in India. Instead of looking at GDP figures, which really do not enable people to make a living on a daily basis, it's possibly better to look at the per capita income of the people. And there you will find that the levels are abysmally low.
Right. What about welfare spending? Because Narendra Modi has been spending heavily when it comes to welfare benefits, such as providing free food grains to some 800 million people. There's health insurance for the poor, funding for constructing houses, etc. I mean, surely that will work in his favor.
Well, you have come to my favorite question, which is essentially about food security. Now, what does it say about a government and a country where the government announces that for the next 5 years, 800 million people will get free food grains. But this is also an admission that for the next 5 years, 800 million plus people will not be able to earn enough so that they can feed themselves. Does it reflect very positively on the country? Definitely not. I think this free food grain is evidence of Mr. Modi's biggest failure.
We'll leave it there for the time being. Thanks so much for joining us today, journalist and author Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay. Thank you, sir. And as people head to the polls, they will be doing so in a country that's acquired an arguably greater importance on the world stage. India is a strategic partner for Western nations such as Germany and the United States. At the same time, it continues to maintain old friendships with countries like Russia. It's a balancing act. And here's a quick glimpse at what that has looked like in the past few years.
Partnership that is among the most consequential in the world, that is stronger, closer, and more dynamic than any time in history.
A lot has changed since I came here 7 summers ago.
Prime Minister Modi is the boss.
That was Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese referring to Narendra Modi during the latter's Australia visit last year. So what are the challenges facing India's engagement with the rest of the world? Sharini Jagtiani is senior officer with the think tank, the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and researches, among other things, India's foreign policy. Sharini, welcome to the studio. Thanks for making the time. How would you describe Indian foreign policy in the past 10 years? Has it changed so much as is claimed?
So one of the interesting things about Indian foreign policy is that it is broadly consistent with what we've seen in the past, irrespective of who's been in power. What has perhaps changed in the past recent years, actually, is more the packaging of that foreign policy. So how that foreign policy is sold, how that foreign policy is made more accessible to the everyday Indian. But some of the sort of key principles of Indian foreign policy, which started as non-alignment in the Cold War era, kind of has now evolved into a strategic autonomy era. And now we also see something called multi-alignment, which alludes to the multiple partnerships that it keeps with not only the Western world, but also other countries as well.
You're talking about multi-alignment. I believe that we do have a question from the chat that we can throw up on your screens now, and we can put that to Sharini. This is a question from Zach Loveless. Was there... I apologize, that was the wrong question, but we will have the right question up shortly. But just in terms of multi-alignment, how is India being able to walk this tightrope, this balancing act between aligning with diverse partners such as Russia on the one hand and the United States on the other? I mean, is there a time limit to this? That at some point that India is going to have to say, all right, we can't do this anymore?
So one of the beautiful things about Indian foreign policy is its persistence to keep an independent voice in its foreign policy. And this harks back to its early independence era. So my understanding would be that India is going to try to manage this tightrope as long as it can. But there are certain pressure points. And one of those pressure points is the China factor. But what it tries to do is, even in situations where it sees sees a tenuous relationship between managing that act, it manages it through diplomacy. So Ukraine, which was a big moment in time when that was put to test, when India did not publicly condemn Russian aggression in Ukraine, but at the same time, at the United Nations Security Council, it issued an explanation to that vote, where it did say that it abides by the principles of the UN Charter, where it respects sovereignty and territorial integrity. So these are some of the ways in which India manages that act. It's a tightrope, but it still will play that balance.
Let's explore this further. You talked about the China factor, and that concerns India's immediate neighborhood. I'm assuming that the China factor will continue to loom large, whatever government comes into power next. What are the challenges that the government will have to face in India's immediate vicinity?
So the China factor will indeed loom large. And just sort of to understand and contextualize for our viewers sort of why the China issue is so big for India, it sort of harks back to the 1960s, during the time when both countries sort of came onto the world stage in early post-colonial nations. And there's a disputed border between both these countries. There was a war that was held in 1962 in which India has suffered a very humiliating defeat. Right. So that has played a major role in the collective memory of Indian foreign policy and hangs large. For the longest time, war and relations were managed between the countries, and that harks back to a moment in the 80s when they decided to isolate the border dispute from other aspects of that relationship. And that all went very well up until 2020, when there were border clashes.
The Galwan incident.
And the Galwan incident.
20 Indian soldiers died.
Exactly.
Let's just take a question that has come from the community in the chat. We're going to throw this question up on your screens now. Putin, this is from Akhil Sirova. Putin and Modi will be the same. Provide your thinking. What is your thinking on this, Shalini?
I'm curious to know what kind of thinking the viewer is alluding to. I think, from what I understand, I mean, they will be strategic thinkers, and they are going to be thinking and acting very strategically in their foreign policies. And I hope that is not only just for Modi, but the next, whoever the next prime minister of the country may be. My understanding is that they will navigate a relationship between both countries, but also make sure that doesn't impinge on other relationships and strategic partnerships.
Speaking about strategic partnerships with other countries, I mean, India, speaking about this balancing act as well, India has really been having to balance its relations with Russia, with the European Union and the United States. How is that going to play out? Will the China factor continue to loom large over there as well? And will India be able to navigate this the way it has been doing thus far?
Absolutely. I think the China factor is one of the key things that will kind of keep India closer to the West in many ways, because there is sort of an alignment in that sense between sort of the West and India on the China threat and the threat that China poses. This is going to be weighing heavily on India's relations with the European Union and the United States.
We'll leave it there for the time being, but thanks so much for coming in, Shalini. It doesn't feel enough to be able to talk about Indian foreign policy in so much time, but thanks so much for your insights.
Thank you for having me.
And that's about it on the program today. But before we leave, it's just worth remembering what's at the core of our production today. It's India's people, nearly 970 million who are eligible to vote. Those who do exercise the power to have their voices heard. And nothing represents that more than the ink on their fingers that people receive after voting. Here's to India's voters. Thanks so much for watching.
Should food just fill you up or taste good? For millions of people, food is above all about